Greetings, everyone, and I hope you're all doing good. I am Zainab Khan, and today I will be the moderator for this session, and I'll try my best that we do fulfill the purpose of this webinar. So I welcome the audience who have joined us on Zoom and the audience who are going to join us through the live Facebook stream. And I welcome you all to this series on the behalf of CPSG Team. So this series actually is a sequel of the last series that CPSG conducted on body, mind, and soul wellness workshop. And the response that we got from that series was really good. And the topics that were covered were those which needed much attention in this time of uncertainty. And that is the reason CPSG has taken the decision to follow up this webinar with another series of webinars on mental awareness, on body wellness, and soul also. So today the topic for this webinar is post-traumatic stress disorder. And the reason is that it's a very important topic and a lot of us might not even be aware of this suffering if this is part of your life also. Before I get to this topic and before I request my speaker to actually start the webinar officially, I'll request Anila Azim, who is a very inspiring lady and leading a very noble cause. And I'll request her to share some thoughts of her on what is her motivation about Muskan. So Anila, thank you very much for taking this initiative, which is very important, first of all. And secondly, what is your initiative and motivation of Muskan starting in the first place?
Yeah. Muskan is basically is a transitional home. And the word Muskan, it's an Urdu word which means a peaceful home. When we started Muskan, our motivation is to make sure that no woman is feeling alone in her fight against violence and struggle to have an empowered life. Every single woman who comes at our door is welcomed warmly to help her get through the struggle. So Muskan is open to everyone.
Wonderful. I think this is a very important part of life and we don't know what kind of struggle these women go through. And there comes the second part of it, I think. Why do you think we need to talk about mental awareness and mental health in particular? Does these customers and clients that you get in the Muskan, they go through certain aspects of their life where they feel the need of getting towards these help in specific perspective of mental awareness?
Yes, I personally believe that people they take mental health for granted. So we should be more cautious of our mental health as well as our other bodily needs that are important. However, people should be given awareness through these discussions, and we have dedicated this platform for this purpose. And I encourage everyone to embrace this, accept and embrace mental health awareness and share it with the people around us.
So when you talk about mental awareness, I'm sure you have been in this field for quite some time and you have faced this situation with a lot of women who are at Muskan. Do you see a positive change in the lives of those women who actually seek help in this particular case? If they are going through certain situation and they seek some help about some therapies or treatment?
Yes, I have seen multiple lives transformed through these mental health treatments. We have recently hired two psychologists to help communities. So what we have to do is to take a person through a proper journey of healing and recovering from a tragedy or trauma to move ahead in their lives with positivity. So it is really effective.
Wonderful. I think this is the narrative and this is the takeaway from for starting this webinar. Do you have any message for our audience who are listening to you at the moment?
I would like to request all those who are listening and have joined us today to be more accepting of the issues around. We need to open our hearts and minds to accept these issues around so that we can fight with them with more knowledge and awareness. And we should try to be more human with every passing day. And I think our lives will be they will be much easier.
I think that's a beautiful message for everyone who's listening to us. Try to be human every single day. I think without further delay, I'll move on to our webinar. And I'm really excited actually for the speaker who has joined us today, because the last time when we had a webinar on healing our soul, I was learned some perspective that I never imagined could be part of this topic. And through this topic, I think we will be realizing and we will be getting to know the perspective of post-traumatic stress disorder that we have never thought or imagined could be. So Dr. Naweed Syed is here with us. I may fall short of words introducing him and may not even do justice. Our pride of Calgary and also the global scientific community. I think very appropriate person to discuss this topic, a person who has dedicated his life research on brain and on neurosciences. So thank you very much, Dr. Naweed, for joining us today. And I think it's a very important topic that we will be actually taking care of, and I hope we do take care of it.
So first of all, I'd really like to thank you and Sister Anila and her entire organization of Muskin for the opportunity. She is a real warrior, works on the streets. You know, we sit in our offices, we push papers, but it's people like her who in the end really changed the world, and they changed the lives and so many lives around them. So all credit really goes to her. And whenever she calls up, I mean, we drop our whatever we are doing to respond to her calls. And also, I think to have a brilliant mind like yours on the other side is another added joy and a pleasure to be really part of this. First of all, I really like to give a disclaimer that I am not a psychiatrist or psychologist by any stretch of the imagination. I am not also a medical doctor, so I am just a learner like everybody else who is listening. So I think we will, learn together, and we will maybe share our thoughts too. You know, before going into this area or topic, I thought that I walked on water, and I had, most of the people will come to me for advice when the doctors have given up. They've given up on medication. They have given up on their physicians. They come to me. And there are many doctors who actually come and visit me and say that, I've got these expensive cars, I drive a Ferrari, I live on an acreage, but I hate what I do. And I don't know why. Whenever a patient, is sick or suffering, and it really brings back some bad memories, and I want to leave that place. So, most of us really go through these kinds of traumatic situations. Sometimes we express them, sometimes we under express them, but they never go away. So I think what we will try to do is that I will share my own personal story that was uncovered as I was doing research. And it dawned to me, oh, dang it, I am studying myself. And all of a sudden, I think everything kind of fell in place. So you have posed some really brilliant questions from your audience and from people. And if I were to answer all of them, I think I will get a PhD maybe, because those are very insightful and very interesting and very important, pertinent questions. So to get done with the disclaimer, I am not a psychologist or psychiatrist. So please take this as an information portion where you could learn, and maybe we could learn together. So I think you posed a question as to what is post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
So I will give you some really simple example that it's an anxiety disorder that develops in reaction to a physical injury or severe mental or emotional trauma. And this is what the psychiatrists and psychologists will really define it as such. But let me add one thing to it, which I have actually experienced, working in the hospital when patients are dying, and I get often called, and usually I get called when there are Muslim, especially, patients who are at the end of their life. I begin to realize that actually, there is another, which is the emotional PTSD. And that emotional PTSD is really linked with spirituality of their life. So they begin to really realize that in this time and part of my life, I have really lost the opportunity to connect to my God, my, whatever I worship or I pray. And it's not just restricted to, being linked to Allah, but they will think about that they have really wasted their life and they have not served the Lord that, they were created to serve. So this really creates an interesting scenario whereby they undergo what we call spiritual PTSD. And at that moment, it's really, really very difficult to bring them back. We know that these people are suffering, and so try to console them and try to overcome. It's the end of life. We learn so much from death, and yet this is the last thing that we do. So I think I give you an example to begin with. I was contacted by a summer student who had just moved from South Africa. And her name was Botha. Botha family was the one that ruled South Africa. And I was contacted by the Faculty of Medicine because she chose me as a mentor. And when I actually met her, I realized that she told me her story, that she was at home and 4 or 5 Black young men, 16 to 18, they entered their house. They first shot her father, and then she had just come out of washroom, and he pointed gun at her and fired 5 shots, and that punctured her lung and also her shoulder, and one of the bullet actually lodged in her spinal cord, and that made her paralyzed. She was actually paralyzed from her waist down. And so, she came and she said, well, you have developed this technology that could really help me, walk back again. And she was a beautiful young girl. She passed her first year of Bachelor of Health Sciences, which is really our flagship program. She aced all the courses and always smiling, always, beautiful in her mannerism as well. So I gathered a team of surgeons and I said, look, if you can do anything for her, please do. And the bullet had lodged in her spine. It was still lodged inside the spine. And so, surgeons got together. They said, well, let's look at it. We'll do this, we'll do this. And that day when I was driving home, I realized, I stopped at the traffic light and I said, if an angel comes and it tells me, Naweed, you've got one wish in your life that we can grant you, what would that be? And I swear she was the only one that was in my prayer. I had no link, no relationship with her, but I said, the only thing I'm going to ask, not for my children, not for my family, nothing, but I will ask for her to go through. And having really worked with her for 1 year, I expanded my lab so she could spend time in the lab. She was a summer student doing research and exciting, but those flashbacks of the traumatic experience, her inability to be able to do what she did, really got her so depressed that she was put on antidepressants and painkillers. And the doses kept increasing and increasing. And one day she went camping and she did not realize that her foot was burning, and legs were burning because she had no pain sensations. Other people smelled the flash, they came running, and all of a sudden they realized that she had now the second, third degree burns to her legs. And so eventually, the sad part was, and that has really left me with, flashbacks as well. When, so year and a half ago, 2 years ago, she passed away. When she passed away, her mother came to see me and she said, you were the only thing that she talked about, and then you were that bright light that kept her alive for this many years. But you know what? I am very, very stressed and I'm falling apart and completely distraught. The reason being that she was not my daughter. And her mother had 7 children and they put her up for adoption. I adopted. But because my name was Botha, and then the Botha family was the ruler in South Africa, these guys thought that these were the rulers that oppressed Black people, and we have to take the revenge. And they actually shot her in that context. So, when I dealt with her, I realized that, PTSD is a lot more that goes on, and people try to struggle and they try to fight it. They try to, do everything in their capacity to overcome. But if it is really not managed properly, and if it leaves physical scars and damage, then it is really very, very difficult. So people should really seek help. And I think that will be really the take-home message for people, is that you are not alone. Your problems are not really the greatest problem on this planet. You are not the only sufferer. You are not alone. We are all going through all of this. And then together, we can actually find and manage and beat this nasty things. So, post-traumatic stress disorder is a condition that occurs in people who really suffer through traumatic experiences. But it's normal for people to feel, extremely anxious. Sometimes you're frightened, sometimes you're uncomfortable. When you're feeling a situation that reminds them of their traumatic experiences. When you think of PTSD, you think of really heroes. You think of people who are far away. You think of strong people, veteran, in the battlefield, that they go in the battlefield, they actually get this PTSD or this scar. It's actually not true. And you will be surprised to learn that women, most people think are, less prone. Women actually are more in numbers in terms of PTSD. So they suffer a lot. You also think that the children don't go through, children at the age of 1 to 8, they suffer trauma, abuse, sexual abuse, accident, poverty, hunger, and other aspects. That also leaves a scar that really makes them debilitated for the rest of their life. So unfortunately, this upsetting feeling, unsettling feeling, it doesn't always disappear. If you experience a constant feeling of dread or worry, or you're constantly plagued by memories of your traumatic situation, even when you are not reminded of it, either through your senses or some scenes outside, through visual input or through auditory input, you might be suffering from PTSD. So PTSD normally, when it's in simple neuroscience terms, if we don't have means to deal with fear and anxiety and trauma, we will not be able to survive. We have those survival instincts that rely on our ability to handle these kinds of situations. Yeah. And so you cannot really completely make it disappear. So they are really there. But when they, if somebody has had a traumatic experience, most psychiatrists will give you 1 month to think about this and then see if you can manage it yourself. So 4 weeks after they have gone through the trauma, let the natural process take its course. You have the adaptive behavior. Your common sense will say, it happened, and I have learned lessons. It will never happen again, and I will not put myself in that situation. So this is really 1 month. So that is the period when most of the people will realize, it's not the end of the world. The next 3 months, the majority would recover, from these kinds of experiences. People move on with their life. But 1 in 5 people, they go on to develop what we call clinically PTSD. And it's especially when they have gone through this, some people will say you should talk right away and discuss this with your doctor and family. And they call it a debriefing period. But most of the psychiatrists will tell you that this debriefing period doesn't really help much, because then you try to intercept, disrupt these kinds of memories halfway, and they become fragmented. When they become fragmented, it's really hard to find one end of the thread to get to the other. So people will allow this to really, for 1 month, let it be, let's see how it evolves and develops. And then if you still persist, and for more than 3 months, then you go and seek and help. And even then, majority will really recover from these traumatic experiences and they get on with their life. But 1 in 5 people, they will end up really developing the post-traumatic stress disorder. So, in brief, it takes 3 months to develop, and it generally lasts for 1 month in most people. Those are mild cases of post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, if they last more than 1 year, then you have a chronic PTSD problem. And here, age is really not a factor. As I said, women are more likely to suffer as well. So this kind of a wrong impression that only men will suffer because they put themselves out there in those situations where they could be traumatized or injured or hurt, or they are the hunter and gatherers of the family. They're the breadwinners. It's not really true. And so women also suffer inside, and that's really also something that we need to pay attention to. It's not really a disorder if it stays in the normal range. Like I said, this is your innate propensity, natural reaction to be able to deal with the challenges in our life. Otherwise, we will be just like a couch potato. It just sits there and do nothing in life. So it's a must requirement for our survival. So, when you think about fear, fear is something that the danger is right in front of you. It's real and you can see it and you could really analyze what the danger is. So I always give an example that you're walking in the park and somebody shows up and they pull a gun, and all of a sudden your brain will realize that the danger is this person, he's got a gun, these are the situation and this is scenario, and I have now 3 options. Either I will fight, or I will flight, run away, or I will just freeze. And sometimes people freeze, and I will talk to you about the biological evolutionary aspects of freezing as to why we actually freeze. So it's really not when you come across anxiety or fear, which will eventually become a traumatic experience, it's not a disorder. So it is a recorder, which records all the things that are happening in your brain and in your personality. And it is really, most cases, it's needed for survival. So if we don't have these kinds of scenarios where we cannot deal with fear or anxiety, we will not be able to survive. I mean, as a father or as a professor, I know that I need to really survive. And I have to really do certain things, which is that overcome my fear and anxiety of not worrying about submitting a paper, getting it rejected, grant getting rejected. So your sensory system really goes from a green light to yellow light to red light. And, PTSD is often, we view it as hidden wounds. They are silent screams. They are inside. You cannot express, you cannot relate it to people, but those are the screams that are happening inside you. And you may not have memories, but you will have feelings. So many people think that, you might have a memory, but there is really no memory, because memories get disrupted, memories get fragmented, memories get made up, and memories get really reformed by many different life experiences. So it's a feeling from the event. And I'll give you some examples when I met and talked to people who really were living with people who suffer from a post-traumatic stress disorder, serious ones. So this is also pretty common in children, and the best way to really bring out in children is a playtime. And I will talk about this later, because this is really very difficult to determine it in children. I talked to a lady, and she just won a case in the United States where she was sexually abused when she was 7, somebody very close to her, 7 to 11, and she had no idea that she was actually abused, because she had the feelings, but there was no memory that she could recall. And I'll discuss her case later as well.
So sorry to cut you through, but I think the point that you're discussing actually triggered some questions that we received. And I think that if it's a continuous feeling and it results as a result of some trauma that occurs in your life, how do one differentiate between, like, if this is stress, this is anxiety, now it's PTSD? Do you like put finger on it? Okay, these are the symptoms and these are the indicators and pointers, and that you're now going through this. So because there are certain situations that you are going through some stress on day-to-day life, of course, we won't say that it's PTSD. So how do you define it when it's happening to you?
Great question, I think, and thanks for interrupting. So, when you think about PTSD, we know that it's a major psychiatric disorders that occurs after trauma. So there are three clusters. One is really re-experiencing. So that would be nightmare, you have bad memories, you have flashbacks, and I'll talk about flashback and we'll give you some personal anecdotes as well. And then so you have experiencing the entire thing, which will recapitulate either in your dreams or turn into bad memory or give you flashback. Or then the second cluster is the avoidance. So you go out of your way to avoid reminders of that feeling. People will come across that I'm strong, I'm macho. And this is what Sister Anila was mentioning early. They really exaggerate their own powers, and they will start to really have an avoidance completely, that I will close my eyes. When a pigeon is attacked by a cat, it closes its eyes thinking that it can't see it, it's no longer there. Actually, the pigeon disappears. And the third cluster really is the hyperarousal. This is where people will have extreme anxiety. They will have insomnia. They're twitchy, they're jumpy, they're restless, they're easily distractible, and they're hypervigilant. So often we see people when they have really ADHD, some of the symptoms will be that they're constantly looking around. We had a lady who was once bitten by a coyote, and she would carry a stick with her in the hospital, and she would try to hush something that actually didn't exist there. So, she thought that she will get attacked again. So those are really the flashbacks. So I'll give you 10 really classical symptoms of PTSD, and everybody should be able to see themselves. And it relates to the question that somebody posed, that how can we know that we are suffering from PTSD? And does PTSD also affect our personality? Does it change us, and we become something very different? So, different people will react differently because no two brains are identical. So brain really shuts down, and that's one thing is, and then the symptom number one will be the flashback. Flashbacks are they are most commonly associated symptoms of PTSD. These can be intrusive or, anxious memories of the situation that caused the trauma in the first place. Or the flashbacks are often triggered by certain situations that are in some ways familiar to the event that triggered the trauma to occur in the first place. And I give you some examples to really explain this a little bit better. The flashbacks can occur, also via emotional triggers. So it's not that the visual or the sensory input will trigger those, or the situation or scenario will trigger that flashback. It's also the emotional triggers. And seemingly they show up out of nowhere. You have no idea. All of a sudden you were laughing and you start crying and you fall apart. Now, during the flashback, a person might feel like that the event is actually occurring again. So everything is happening. We have seen situations where this woman was raped, and in the middle of the meeting, she really went through the entire recapitulation of that scenario as the bunch of men sitting around that table were actually attacking her. So they will experience the same feelings, as they may interpret their external reality much differently than it actually is. So, brain had some time to make up stories since the event happened, and then the flashback. So your brain will, when you read something, you heard about something, when you discussed with something, they provided the feedback, or when you were dreaming, you were having night terrors or nightmares. These nightmares will interrupt the original memory, and they will create a scenario which is very different than the actual situation when the incident really happened. So often dream will, enact the situation, and it leaves traces of other kinds of memories on your brain and your thinking process. So, I met a famous neurologist and a neuroscientist. Her name was Janet Sehorn, and she's senior to us. And she told me that when she got married, she didn't realize that her husband actually had chronic PTSD. And she said the way she learned, but he was a Vietnam veteran. He went to Vietnam, and one day he was sleeping in his tent, and they took a direct hit. A rocket hit the tent. Her colleagues died. He survived, and injuries were not significant enough that he stayed there or was kept on the duty, and he continued to serve. And one day, when he was flying a chopper, he went to pick up those injured people, and as they were about to land, their helicopter was hit by it took a direct hit, and the chopper really smashed in bits and pieces, and he found himself covered with the gasoline of the helicopter and then the blood of people who really died. So she said we went with him for a roller coaster ride, and we thought, he's a macho man, he's the army man, he can handle this nasty roller coaster dragon ride. And we were on there, and as it took off, he immediately started to scream. He turned pale, and he was about to throw up, and he said, "Stop this thing, I cannot take it." And then, when the ride ended, he quickly went into the washroom and he threw up. That ride brought that flashback when he was hit by that rocket when he was on a helicopter. And he also said that because, when the war veterans go and they will see these mines all over the place, he says every time he saw toys and other things sitting on the floor, he will really get very agitated and very irritated because they will bring back that flashback to it. And I also tell you a personal story that, we were new in Alberta. We decided to go camping, so people said, Rockies, beautiful place, fantastic. So we packed up, bought some stuff, tents, and I said, okay, we will be now, and we'd say a Dundee family, we'll go out, and we venture out. So, but, not knowing rules and regulation, we left everything till the last minute. And then we found by Columbia Ice Field, we found a campground, and we went there, and it was 11 o'clock. So how the Desi people do. We took up some chickpeas, and we thought we warm it up. I lit fire, and as everything was cooking, this person came screaming out of his tent, and he had water cooler, and he poured it on my fire and put it out right away. And immediately his wife followed, and this was a young couple, and she's apologized. She said, "I'm really, really sorry. When he was a young boy, their house caught fire. And in that fire, the sense of smell brings that flashback. And every time he will smell, smoke, he will have that flashback. And in that really incident, his dog died. And that has left a particular trauma. So, these flashbacks can come in many different ways. And my own personal flashback, I was about maybe 7 or 8. And we used to, my father was assigned in Jung, and our house back down to fields. So there was nothing behind our house. We had a nice garden. And during summertime, we would sleep outside because it was nice and cool and fans were on. So in the middle of the night, I woke up. And when I woke up, I went to get some water and from the cooler. And as I was drinking water, I saw somebody carrying our suitcases through the back door and going out. So I immediately realized that it was a thief that broke into our house, a burglar, and he was taking all the jewelry and then the valuable things. And I wanted to scream to wake up guards, because the guards were on the other side because, the family was separated, and nobody thought that somebody will come from the back door. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't scream. I was absolutely dead silent. And what happens is that when you are asleep, the blood supply to your speech center and other centers is cut off. And when those parts are not active, what happens is that even if you try to scream, you cannot. You almost get frozen. So I went and I shook up, guards, and then they fired a few shots, and then eventually, so that thing, I thought it was no big deal. It's just done, I've grown out. But whenever I have a nightmare, or I am chasing somebody, a demon, or fighting the demons, or fighting in my dreams, Trump, and of course he always wins, but the bears or those kinds of things, what happens is that I cannot scream. And normally people will scream. I just make those noises as if I'm trying to scream, but the sound is not coming out. And so whenever I have these nightmares, this always happens. And also, if I am frustrated at something, most people will kick the bucket, throw things away. I always make that noise, as if grinding my teeth, and I just am speechless, and I will not really say anything. People say biting my tongue and that way. So, all of these kinds of things affect us, and we think we have grown out, but somehow they're still in our memory bank, and they kind of, bring the flashbacks. So the second important thing, so I talked about flashbacks. So these flashbacks are really something that come, and often sometimes they're distorted. And sometimes, for people, flashback could be the right side of your brain. We have the temporal lobe, which is very close to your ear. People have actually examined it neurologically, and I'll talk about this. There are changes, but that part of the brain, the right side, actually deals with sensory perception. So smell, taste, your vision. And so that part of the brain is always the most affected one. If you smell a situation, if you see a scenario or lights or certain, we have sometimes women who were being raped, in the court, they were frozen. They were frozen stiff when they were being raped, but their brain was still functional, and they could count the number of tiles on the ceiling. And they told the judge, there are 37 tiles on the ceiling that I could really imagine. But, sometimes the sounds that are made at that time, sometimes the smell, at that time, sometimes, lighting situation, they are all the sensory parts will trigger flashback in most often people. And sometimes it's the feeling of that moment. So the second really symptoms is the extreme reactions to memories of the event. This is also really a very important symptom, and it is closely related to flashbacks. It's like having an extreme reaction to the reminder of that traumatic experience, and these can include, all of a sudden your heartbeat goes up, you have no idea, you take a quick breath, nausea, tension, stress, vomiting, and then people start to sweat for no reason. And this then also trigger anxiety or panic attack, that people don't know why I am having this panic attack. There are always reasons, and those reasons could be either, flashback, or your extreme reactions to memories that your brain is recapitulated or triggered when you were going through a particular. So these are really the known psychosomatic symptoms, because they occur in the body as a result of the way that your mind is behaving. So your mind picks up a cue, and all of a sudden, because your body is subservient to it, it will really react. And these symptoms, your heart will start beating, and everything else will be put on high state of alert. Now, these symptoms can cause intense stress, and they're both physically and mentally really harming. And they are very, damaging, because you could actually have a heart attack, you could really have nausea, you could have, a stomach ache, and those kinds of things are the physical responses of what your brain is actually doing. And so they can cause quite serious stress. They can also lead to flashbacks if the PTSD patient lacks the proper coping mechanisms. And I think in the interest of time, we may not be able to get to it in this session, maybe the next time, where I will actually give you some indications as to how most people deal with these flashbacks or these anxiety or panic attacks. And there are very simple ways to deal with it rather than medication. So the third symptom that we often talked about is the avoidance. One of the most common coping mechanisms that people adopt, and who suffer, you know, from PTSD is they avoid any of those situations. So intrusive thoughts, they will avoid it. And you try to show that you really have strength and then you can handle just about anything else. But you will have nightmare and you will overreact and then have hyper arousal. So you will actually try to pretend as if nothing can handle or hurt you, and you will avoid all of this thing. Whether they do this consciously, unconsciously, you know, they will avoid places, things, activities that remind them of their traumatic experience. So if it happened in the park, they will not go to park. If it happened in a community center, swimming pool, they will avoid all of this. So you know, this avoidance can reach another level when it is observed emotionally. You know, to avoid any kind of emotional trigger, the individual may avoid certain mind states and feelings, so they are not unconsciously put into that state which is familiar to where the traumatic experience really happened or the incident happens. For example, if someone was in a very intimate setting and they're feeling close to that some person during the trauma that resulted in their post-traumatic stress disorder or the abuse, they may close themselves off completely to avoid intimacy with anybody and everybody. And all of a sudden, you know, sometimes you have consensual, you know, situations where people get, you know, without their consent and, you know, non-consensual intimacy acts, they will then avoid even the intimate aspects. And then freezing also, as I talked about, is an adaptive value. We have seen in animals, if you look at, you know, the Darwin's theory and also evolution, if you are a hunter-gatherer in the olden time, and you were attacked by a whole pack of lions, and people start to run, but the person who actually falls and drops, and it really falls down and lays on the ground is more likely to survive. So it's a kind of a survival strategy that is built in. Same thing if you're attacked by, you know, T-Rex, you make sure you don't move and you just freeze. So this frozen part is somehow also built into our circuits, and it gives us a survival chance. And actually true, the people who fall down and they lay there, these lions will chase those targets that are moving and they're more interested in, and then they leave you alone and you can survive. So dissociation, you know, when people get shell shock, they have trance-like states. You know, usually women, rape or physical violence will go through this. And then you have, you know, you're scared, speechless, like I was. I couldn't shout because the blood supply to my speech center was really gone. So people cannot make those noises when they are going through these traumatic experiences. And it's also part of freezing. The fourth symptom really is the lost memory. Many people who suffer from PTSD, they aren't able to remember certain aspects of their experience that really led to the trauma. And usually this is common in children. Many people have completely forgotten the experience altogether by blocking it out. So it's not available to your conscious memory. So, you know, memory components in your brain are there. They did not allow them to be established fully. And as a result, it became very vague, fragmented, and they could not put really finger as to what really issue is. So you got memory loss from that people because it's an interruption of memory, which also requires an active process, which we call protein synthesis dependent mechanism. These people may benefit from therapy. So, you know, seeking medical attention should be done as soon as possible if you are having really losing that memory. You know, people have blocked out their traumatic memories are the most difficult to treat. It's just like people who value you know, honesty the most or fairness the most are the most difficult to teach the fairness to. So similarly, these patients who have actually intentionally lost their memory or tried to block, you know, they are the most difficult to treat. They may respond irrationally to certain situations without knowing the underlying reason. Why am I really reacting or behaving this way when there is no reason for me to react? And it actually is bits and pieces of memory that are reconciled or attached, associated with that PTSD experience that they are not able to put it all together as a string or as a story. And the fifth symptom is really the detachment. And many people, many cases of PTSD, they arise as a result of traumatic, interaction with another person. And most of the time, they are the people that people who have suffered these sorts of experiences are often, they're very reluctant to engage with others. So they isolate themselves. On a subconscious levels, they may be worried that they are going to behave in a similar manner. So they don't trust that person. They don't have faith in that person. And they're always, always detached from the actual things, very important things, that is the people that will eventually help them recover from these kinds of experiences. The people suffering from PTSD, they find it very difficult to connect intimately with others. Now, this could mean that they have difficulty engaging in close relationship, maintaining friendship, or being part of the family. So this dissociative episode, which they also call, psychiatrists will define them as a detachment. These are really the heads up. They are the signs that that something is about to happen. So my advice to all people is that when you are going through that phase, or you think that there is a detachment and you are about to have a panic or isolation attempt, find a calm spot. And grounding yourself really, really helps. And some people will do, and I do that as well. My family will drag me onto these nasty and hideous roller coaster rides. They enjoy it and I don't. But when I sit there, everybody's screaming, but I just sit there as if I am actually watching a TV. And they say, how do you do this? And I cover that anxiety or that stress by pushing my feet really hard onto the paddle where I am sitting in that chair. The moment you do this, boom, those feelings just disappear. So finding a calm spot, and also finding, pressing your foot down onto something will really, really help you from getting over these kinds of detachments and these signals. The sixth symptoms is really the disinterest. Some people who suffer from PTSD, they develop some really serious disinterest in activities that they were interested in previously. Sports they loved, watching movie that they loved, but that person who was involved in traumatizing them was part of those activities. And they may completely abandon old hobbies and activities and simply spend their time doing nothing. They really lose interest in life. They don't do any, hobbies that they enjoy. Some people, also lose interest in their future. And I've seen it in many students. They may let go of the aspirations that they, have once held for most of their life, and says, it doesn't really matter. I'm a wreck. I am just totally destroyed. There's no point in doing anything. So some people with PTSD believe that they will never be able to overcome their issues. So they see no purpose or reason in pursuing a good lifestyle. It's really important to notice that this symptom is also quite common in patients who are dealing with depression. So it's crucial for a doctor to evaluate if the person is also suffering from depression or not. And so when you think about really PTSD, you also have a borderline personality disorder in some people. They call them BPD, which is commonly co-occurred with PSD. So between 25 to 60% of the people who have borderline personality disorder, they will also have this post-traumatic stress disorder. A rate is actually much more higher than what you see in the normal people. So these two things also need to be looked together, because both of them are believed to stem from the experience of traumatic events in the life. The thoughts, the feelings, and behavior seen in these kinds of borderline personality disorders might be the result of childhood trauma. And this is something really important to keep an eye on, that when you see these borderline personality disorders that sometimes blend into PTSD, that you need to really go back and then search their childhood trauma. What might have happened? So a person who experienced childhood trauma is in really increased risk of developing these two together. In fact, people with both borderline personality disorder and PTSD, they often report earlier experience of trauma compared to people who were just diagnosed with PTSD. And so this will result into impulsive behavior, unstable relationships, and greater risk of experiencing a traumatic event such as car accident or physical or sexual assault. So the symptoms of PTSD and borderline personality disorders, can also overlap. But people with both of them, they have difficulty managing their emotions. Their experience is intense. The feelings are really, exacerbated, and they will have mood swings, and they will also have anger and tantrum when they throw actually tizzy for no good reason. So people with PTSD, especially those who have lost a loved one, may have fear of abandonment, and also associated with other personality disorders. And so, there are symptoms for these as well, which is the anger problem, anxiety, depression, dissociation, impulsivity, interpersonal problems, and then you have psychiatric disorders. So general stress, suicidal thoughts, when the little children get really bullied, and you can see now that the suicide rate among these young kids have really doubled now in the recent years, because those are the kinds of things that really, they perceive their life not worth living. They perceive their health not worth maintaining. And the symptoms number 7 is anxiety. Many people suffering from PTSD, they develop really serious anxiety problems. And this can develop into 2 types of anxiety. One is the generalized anxiety, and they have general feelings of discomfort or, throughout the day. That for some reason, they don't know why they're anxious, what is really bothering them. And they may also develop social anxiety where they isolate themselves, or fear behind expressing their experience or displaying their symptoms. They will just have social anxiety. They may also develop a more kind of existential anxiety, which begins to be uncomfortable about life itself. And the anxiety can lead to many problems in the life of PTSD sufferers. So I've got last 2 left, and then the symptoms is really insomnia. Many people suffering from PTSD, they develop quite serious insomnia, and this could be in the form of a number of causes. One of the reasons that they develop insomnia is because the anxiety and the PTSD can cause to them, and they don't really, they think that when they are going to fall asleep, they will lose the control, and somebody will come and hijack their mind as well. So anxiety is one of the leading causes of insomnia, and it causes person to really develop, restlessness, agitation, and they will have, problems that keep a person tossing and turning at night. They can't really sleep very well, and this really exacerbates the situation very much. And they may also develop hypervigilance or excessive alertness because they're worried or paranoid about their trauma repeating, as I said earlier, because they have no control, or their triggers being activated. So they can really keep these things can keep a person awake all night. And when you think about this, is also very primitive behavior. If you see these ducks that are sitting in a line, the duck on the right side will always have its right eye open, and then the other duck will have its left eye open all the time. The rest of the ducks will sleep peacefully because they think that there's somebody watching and they're vigilant. So, you think that falling asleep, you lose control. And when you lose control, you are vulnerable, and then you could be really threatened. And so, I suggest people that, always keep very, calm light and gentle light. Keep a piece of paper and a notepad. And if you are having any sentiments and feelings, just write them down, but make sure that you look at them the next day, and then try to execute those things that try to overcome them that really bothered them. And that really helps you fall asleep. And then the next session, I'll tell you a few tricks. I have been practicing for years. It takes me 5 minutes and I'm gone. And those are certain exercises you could really do. And the symptom number 5, we've got 2 left, is the emotional instability. So another common symptoms that people, who are suffering from PTSD, they can develop is the emotional instability. They just really fall apart. So PTSD is a condition that's really heavily based on your emotions. And that's the one component. The other is your sensory system, which I told you, the right part of the brain, because this is the part of the brain that you smell, you taste, you do the real situation kind of things that the fear mind always evaluates it. And it can cause some really serious emotional distress for those who are not sure of how to cope with it. So emotional instability often manifests in negative ways. You know, after a traumatic experience, a person may become more aggressive and angry, being more prone to outbursts, and they may become more irritable and lash out for little reasons, or they may develop a habit of self-destruction or reckless behavior. And this is where suicide actually comes in and hijacks them. And then finally, the 10 symptoms that, you know, the classical textbook, the Bible will tell you is the emotional dampening. And so in addition to emotional instability, a person may develop more consistent feelings of negative emotions. You know, these could include guilt, shame. Well, maybe I should not have really gotten myself in that situation. I had a summer student who, you know, beautiful young lady who went out with this guy in a different city, and he put something in her drugs, in her drink, and then, you know, he assaulted her. But at that time, she really was guilty about herself. Why did she let this happen at that time? And that brought in shame and self-blame. And then, you know, a beautiful mind, a beautiful person with outstanding capabilities had those flashbacks whenever she visited a different town. And then it really destroyed her life until we got her, you know, some really important counseling. So these are, you know, they blame themselves for these, putting themselves in a situation that, you know, resulted in the traumatic experience. They may also feel like they are more alone in the world than they actually are. So when you are really emotionally dampening or dissociated, you feel that, you know, you are the only one who suffered and you are the only one to blame. And they may choose not to reach out to people, believing that nobody believes them, nobody listens to them, nobody is going to lend a helping hand. And this is actually not true. So depression and hopelessness are really common symptoms of PTSD. And they can remain consistent. People suffering from PTSD, they also have a hard time trusting other people, and they may blame others for betraying them. So this is another kind of a wrench thrown in the ring when the people will say, well, you should not have taken me to this party when I introduced me to this guy that I went out, and then this all happened. So I've given you really 10 major reasons in the interest of time. We have flashback, extreme reactions to memories of the event, the avoidance behavior that you completely isolate yourself, loss of memory that you intentionally try to suppress those memories, or for some reason those memories got corrupted. And then you have detachment. You detach yourself from the very, you know, helpful people or family or friends who can actually help you heal. So one of the healing drugs that you have is passion and compassion, love and affection of other people. You just detach yourself. And then you're disinterested in life, that you're no longer really want to continue. There is no purpose, as if that particular incident and event was the sole purpose of your life. And that once that is taken away from you, that the life is over, the game is over. So, you know, if you're a main hockey player or a quarterback is injured, you just turn off the game. They say the game is over. The replacement's not really going to do anything. I'm not watching this game anymore. And then anxiety also is an important parameter. You need to learn to handle this. And then another important really part of the PTSD is in insomnia. You have the sleeplessness, you have problem sleeping, or you wake up quite often sweating for no reason. And that also actually, you know, exacerbate your health because you don't get proper sleep, you're not healthy, you're not able to give your body or your brain enough time to heal and repair itself. And then you have emotional instability, where you are not really sure what's going on. You will just become so unpredictable that people will give up on you. And then you get the emotional dampening of every effect is really there. So, these are really the 10 important parts. I can go on to your questions if,
Yes.
People are
I
still
was getting,
interested in.
yes, they are. And I think they are more interested now because we have gone through, actually, these symptoms covered a lot of questions that were already posted to us by our audience. And now there are some questions here. And of course, there are some people who are interested in knowing that something like traumatic happens in your life. It's very much okay that your brain will undergo certain changes and you will feel PTSD. First of all, self-awareness and accepting that it is okay for your survival. Second thing is that there's a question regarding this, that does our brain actually have some developmental or structural changes when a trauma occurs? Because in certain situations, all of these symptoms, this is something that we cannot control. It happens all of a sudden. There are some triggers for it. So does the brain undergo some developmental or some kind of structural changes?
That's really a great question, and it's in my domain. So the only thing now I can say for certain, confidence is this part. So does brain change, during PTSD? The answer is yes. Now, PTSD doesn't affect our brain structurally. So it's not that all of a sudden you've got a big chunk of the part that is now gone and the brain is physically damaged. That doesn't happen. You will have trauma and brain injury when certain parts of stroke, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, certain parts of the brain are structurally damaged, and they cannot be repaired because the natural replacement of damaged brain tissue does not take place. Here, other parts of the brain will have to come in and help out. So the brain is not damaged. That's an important thing, and that really makes everybody very happy. But it shows significant structural changes. So if you do the MRI or PET scans, and more recently they have MEG, which is magnetoencephalogram. This is a really important technique. And what they found, as I mentioned earlier, that your right temporal lobe shows measurable changes. So the gray matter, which is the thinking part of the brain, it really shows epilepsy-like discharges. So there are discharges, these brain cells will just have, for some reason, there is no cloud, there is no, chances of rain or anything else. So small little cloud is out there, it starts to discharge and you get electrical storms and you have no reason that there are no negative and positive, clouds that will come together, and then you have thunder and lightning. So it's like an epilepsy or epileptic-like discharges in your right temporal lobes. And these doesn't appear to be scars. So there is really no scar that you could really see that might have brought that flashback. So the right brain is, as I said to you, is your sensory brain. It is really coupled with color, smell, the sense of being here. It is the now moment. You are here. I am really connected to you, and through you, all the other listeners. And the way I feel it, I see it, I taste it, I smell it. All of my senses will actually give me the texture of this particular memory that I have right now. And because it's the right part of the brain, so the right temporal lobe is the one that really gets really affected. So the left part of your brain is knowing that you're having a memory, and it places it, connects it with the past and then the future. So it will take this sensory information, it will analyze it, it will categorize it even more, and it will then go back to past, link it with past, and then it will project it with the future as to what might have happened or might happen in that case. It's that part of the brain that tells you that, don't forget to pick up bread on your way home, otherwise you won't have breakfast. It's that part of the brain that tells you don't forget to do your laundry this weekend. It's that part of the brain that tells you that I am. And then you detach from the right part of the brain and then the left part goes on its own. So when people really rely on these sensory perceptions more, they will have triggers which will be mostly sensory. And people who are relying on the left part of the brain, where they are trying to really have emotional distress and emotional things. So, you know, if there is an increased anxiety, you become really volatile. Your limbic system kicks in. The limbic system is that what we call really the reptilian brain. It's really the very basic part of the brain that alerts you from all the dangers, the situations around you. It's the alarming system in your body or in your house. And it will look for intruders. If some window is broken, somebody comes, it sends the message. So in these people, the amygdala, which is, you know, two nuggets, this looks like really two almonds on each side of the brain. That is a little sensor detector, is detecting all of these threats and dangers, and then it tells you through your cortex, and then your frontal lobe or the frontal cortex will analyze it. Says, oh, it's okay, it's just my son, my daughter just entered the house, no need to trigger the alarm, and it calms down. And then your cortex will ask your hippocampus. The hippocampus is that part of the brain where on each side where actually memory is taken, retrieved, and also stored. And your cortex will ask your hippocampus, how should I react? And if the memory is not there or fragmented, all of a sudden your amygdala will hijack the brain and it will cause you to fight, flight, or freeze. So these kinds of dissociated responses, you see two types of PTSD. You have dissociated, which is trance-like states, you know, which is up above the scene. You are watching yourself, what is happening to you, but you're actually not attached to it. So you're completely dissociated from it. You're spaced out. And the other is really the arousal, which is the flashback. And then the flashback happens, you go back in that time and space in a moment. So you're in people who have really PTSD, structurally, their hippocampus volume, where memory is stored, is actually reduced. And the amygdala in people who are serial killer, they have no fear. It's actually 27% smaller than normal people. So they have no fear. They really not worry. They don't concern about anything. So hippocampus, where learning and memory actually occurs, is is reduced in volume, and this is very well known. But we don't know if the developmental issues or earlier aspects of life trauma caused the hippocampus to shrink, and that made these people more vulnerable to PTSD. We don't know this, but there are fewer number of brain cells or neurons in that area. So, and the amygdala will increase in these people. So brain is injured, but it's not really physically injured. Its connectivity is injured, which can be really repaired. So it's not that hard. You know, if you have a tire missing of your car, you can't drive without it. But, you know, if there is another issue with, you know, the inside light is not working or the fan's not working inside the car, you can still really drive it through. So the same thing happens in the brain. It's that, you know, the wheels are intact, the engine is intact, everything is working. The only thing that is that the wiring of the lighting that turns the light inside your dashboard is not really working, or your phone charger is not working. The rest is all perfect. And that's why it really gives a tremendous hope for us to be able to go in and fix that. And then the life goes on.
Right. I think then there are two questions that I would like to briefly, I would like you to touch upon them, and that is related to flashback. And then there is one audience person who is specifically putting on a case scenario of Afghanistan and family members killing, actually. And then they are asking briefly about the coping strategies for it. So if the brain is not injured to the level where the structure is changed and the wiring is altered and there is a hope of improvement, what could we briefly highlight the strategies of coping with this situation? I know this is something that we will be following up in our session, but I think these are some key takeaways for hopefulness and optimism for upcoming sessions, inshallah.
So, you know, that is really a very, very important question. And it's really, I think we will not be able to do
Yeah.
justice to it.
Yes.
And I don't want to leave, I can answer it, but I don't really want to kind of leave fragmented stuff in there. But, you know, people who have really suffered, and I have, you know, many doctor colleagues, you know, my students who become doctors, and they see the death, you know, right then and there. And there is sometimes guilt that really comes in, that, you know, maybe I should have been there, maybe I should have done this, why not this, why not this? And they try to really blame themselves, or they put themselves in that situation. Maybe I should not have been there, maybe I should have been there, maybe I should have done this, maybe this could not have happened. And I think the problem that actually happened is real, and that has happened. And we begin to realize that, you know, life and death is from God and from Allah. We don't come at our will, we don't go at our will. But, you know, if things happen, they happen for some reason, and it is a test for those who survive, who they are really living behind. But there are really coping strategies. We will tease them apart, and then, you know, we'll be happy to walk them through this. But I don't want to really leave them with the kind of you know, half glass, which will create problems rather than solve them.
So I think then this session actually covered very extensively the symptoms, understanding the post-traumatic stress disorder, and what actually happens when you're going through it. So first thing that I would like to mention is that it is completely okay if certain things happen in your life. These are not in your control. Accept those incidents in your life, and there is hope to move forward. And then I would like to share that the audience who have joined us, there will be follow-up sessions on the coping strategies and the treatment and cure. There were some questions specifically in understanding, is there really a cure? I mean, they couldn't believe that there could be a cure of certain situations of PTSD. So I think this marks the end of our session, keeping in mind the timing constraint. Dr. Naweed, do you have any final thoughts for our audience who have joined us for all of this time? And I think there are some serious concerns that these audience have shared with us.
So, you know, first of all, I would say that don't consider yourself alone. Like, I put myself out there, and, you know, it solved my own puzzle. As to my wife always says that, you know, in your dream, you just make that really strange noise, which nothing really comes out. You don't say anything, you don't speak, but you make that as if you're trying to say something, and it's not a scream, it's not a screech, it's something kind of, and I know what it is. And I know immediately related black flashback took me to the place when it actually happened, and I thought I was done with it. So, you know, you're not alone. The most important thing is that also you cannot really cover it up. You cannot really say I'm done with it. So the realization of problem actually opens the door for solution of the problem. And, you know, then there are loved ones. You talk to people who actually you value most, you know, and to go back to the same situation that caused, you know, recapitulated the situation with some help and family and friends. So I think, you know, the psychotherapy and then drugs, they are there, but you are smart, intelligent people. You have been empowered with an incredible brain that allows you to be able to handle this, fix this problem internally. No Messiah is going to come from outside to fix this problem, because the problem is actually inside your head, and they cannot see inside your head, no matter how sophisticated technology they use, because you have, you know, trillions of brain connections, and you have more brain cells than there are, you know, stars in the Milky Way and the galaxy. So this is impossible for someone to pinpoint. They only go through those 10 symptoms that you tell them. But if you are the only one who actually knows the situation and scenario, because oftentimes, you know, and when we see that the girls in our children's hospital, 98% of chronic pain patients are women, because whenever they go with their mothers, they will always try to catastrophize the pain, right? The dads like me will say, suck it up. But, you know, when I learned how children sometimes will handle trauma, I actually felt guilty. I felt bad. I felt ashamed of myself that, you know, I don't know what kind of scar it will leave. When we had these fish, and one day, and you know, the kids were looking after fish, they named it Nemo. I came home, and then, you know, they said, "Daddy, Nemo died." And I said, "Wow, Nemo died. Let me show you what we do with these things." I scooped it up and I put it in the toilet and flushed it. It spun. And then I said, all of these waters, they go to the ocean. And then I realized, oh my God, what have I done? And so, you know, the things that we don't realize in our lives that, you know, it could emotionally scar our children.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important that we are vigilant, we are careful how we deal with other people, and we are all interconnected. We're all a one big, large family. And I think if one of the family members suffers, it's like the part of the body where if my toenail really bothers me, I will stay up all night. So I think don't feel yourself alone. Talk to people that you believe in, you trust. And most of the time, you have the strength and the courage, and you have the beautiful, beautiful brain that will allow you to cope with this kind of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Beautiful. I think this is the key takeaway. And with this message, I will end this webinar with a hope that we will be looking forward to more awareness session on these topics, because there is a more to it, and it's very important that we talk about them. So thank you very much, Dr. Naweed, and thank you very much to the audience who have joined us on Zoom and the live session. I hope you all have some very good takeaway messages that you can act upon in your life. Take good care of yourself, and Allah Hafiz.